Mic check, mic check, mic check. Y'all know the face, y'all know the name. I know what y'all hear. I know what y'all hearing. I know what y'all hearing. I know what y'all hearing. Y'all hearing that immaculate tape in the back. You're tuned into the world's greatest podcast, Talking Cheap Podcast, hosted by yours truly, Mr. It's a Movie Cletus Road Talk. And I got a special guest here with me. By now, y'all know the rules. I do not introduce my guest. I feel like it's very lackluster. I feel like it's not vibes in that. So, guest, please introduce yourself.
Oh, Lord. Kulamasi. Hello, my name is Keshia Talking Waters. I'm Rampo Lenape Muncie, so I'm Native American. I'm indigenous. My tribal territory is New York and New Jersey and Western Connecticut, but I grew up in Rhode Island and Narragansett land.
Hold on, you said a whole lot of shit.
I did.
You said...
well, that's why I said, oh, Lord. You want me to introduce myself?
Wagwan, my dogs. My name... I'm from there. No, that shit fire. So you said your name is what? Hold on, say it again. What's your name?
Well, I guess my government name is Keshia, although, that's also African. But my native name is Talking Waters, and I'm Rampo Lenape Muncie, so that's my tribe.
Okay.
Our tribal territory, if we want to work on where we all are now, our modern name is Mahwah, New Jersey, so Bergen County, Nyack, Ringwood, into New York, Hilburn, Suffern, so and then Western Connecticut, Danbury, Reddington, Connecticut. But I grew up in Rhode Island, which is Narragansett territory.
That's so fire. So you're my first Native American friend for real. You know, a lot of niggas be like, they Native American.
Oh, shit.
You know what I mean? Niggas be like, my mama Native American. My granddaddy, I'm talking about you my first, you said my name is Talking Waters. You said my name is Talking Waters. What does that even mean? That means you really about to talk your shit.
Yeah, this is it. I've never been on a podcast, so I guess this is kind of serendipitous.
I'm honored. How did you get your name?
That's a good question. So Talking Waters is actually not my first name, if you will. Prior to that, it was Dancing Butterfly. And my mom to this day says that I was wrongly named because she always felt like I was Talking Waters, and my aunts. Essentially, my name came from the women in my family based on my birth story. My mom had a really hard time having me, and she gave birth to me at 40, so even being able to get pregnant. But yeah, I didn't move ultimately in the womb a lot. So my mom went in for ultrasounds once a week. And once born, we both spiked temperatures of 104 at the same time. And we both also came down at the same time. But I think a lot of it is just personality. My mom always says I can be a riptide, but I could also be a calm swell. So
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I feel like there's not enough history on Native Americans and the contributions Native Americans made. Because a lot of the history we hear about Native Americans is basically all the brutal things that happened by the white man to Native Americans in the conquering of this nation. So what are some things that we, the people who may not know needs to know about Native Americans and the culture and the way in which you all operate?
Oh my goodness. This is a huge question. I mean, it's a good question, but it's huge. So I guess I don't want to play semantics, but my academic background is in law, so international law at that. So I do think the language game can be kind of fun. And I definitely, in my personal use, I use indigenous more than I do Native American because I am in the mentality of fuck borders, right? We existed across these lines of what are known as the U.S. and Canada and Mexico well before those words even existed. So I think that's the first real conversation, right? It's everywhere you go, you are on native soil. I think Iceland is the only country in the world that says there's no indigenous people there, other than maybe North Korea and China. But that puts it all into perspective of how we even view where nativeness exists. And when I think about friends that I have who are from Rwanda and places who have experienced a lot of genocide from village structures, there's an indigeneity that exists everywhere, and how we all identify with that first and foremost is a huge conversation. But yeah, I think just the knowledge of where we are is hard because I think people definitely like if you've ever been to Vermont or like Maine, everyone's like, there's no black people there and there's no natives there. And that's not true. There's a huge immigration population, especially in the north, even like further north when we talk about places like Halifax, huge Lebanese population, huge Syrian population. So being able to understand like where people are and whose territory you're on is so critical.
I like that. All right. So you said that there's been native people everywhere. So like there's a such thing as native Africans?
Yes, there are indigenous people to the continent of Africa. I think it's more commonly understood as tribal nations or like the village structure that exists. Like
Shout out to the villagers. If you know, you know.
And yes, I think about Democratic Republic of Congo, and I think about, like I said, Rwanda. I think about Western Africa in terms of, even if we want to get into it, like Somaliland versus Somalia. Like there's this acknowledgement of the colonial lines that are straight on a map not being true to the people that live there. And I think in a political structure, trying to open those doors is really difficult, but we see that through culture and we see that through spirituality and we see that through art. So it does, it exists. I think it's like a really sensitive topic because so many people don't want to open those doors also, because that leaves room for other forms of conflict.
No, I understand completely. It's kind of like the race-issue of black culture, black history in this nation, as well as just like how they're trying to erase like critical culture or critical theory or critical cultural theory in all of academia, because they don't want people to actually look at how white history or history that has been taught to us has been misinforming all Americans, all people across the world. So I understand completely, and I'm excited to really have you as a guest on Talking Cheap podcast. Okay, so cool. So you got your name from your moms and all the women. What were the roles of the women in the spaces they occupied in indigenous land?
Wow, that's a heavy. Oh my God. That's a great question. That's a heavy question because I feel like it's also double-sided, right? You ask about female structures, then naturally, what are male structures and what are queer structures? And so much of that depends on where you are in terms of what we know as the medicine wheel or the coordinate direction, so north, south, east, and west. Right now we're in the eastern door, which is yellow because the sun rises in the east. And I would say that for most Eastern nations, including some northern Eastern nations, so like the Mi'kmaq or the Micmac are nations that are Maine and more northern. But I think there's this structure of life givers having a huge and significant role in terms of determining war and determining peace treaties and determining political structures in terms of like who the next chief would be or who those people would be, because there's this understanding that life givers are also then around that entity the longest, right? So if you want to know who your next chief is, you need to ask the person who gave birth to them. Right? There's this, if you want to go to war, you need to ask the people who make life if it's worthy of taking a life. I'm Ramapo Lenape, and Lenape being the overarching family branch. Lenape, we had treaties with other Native nations and agreements such as the Haudenosaunee, which is a larger branch for nations like the Mohawk and the Oneida, and the Gayogono or the Seneca out of western New York and into northern New York and into parts of Canada. And so for Haudenosaunee, there's something known as uterine law, which is this concept of essentially having a uterus being the ultimate decision maker, because similarly to the world, everything lives on this balance of life and death. And it's like when women are pregnant, there's this quantum leap that happens. They're living in terms of life and death all at once inside of them. So I think there's a huge matriarchal being in terms of most Eastern nations, although with that being said, there's also this gender fluidity and acknowledgement of what two-spirit, as the Anishinaabe say, or like what Anishinaabe is another tribe, or what gender fluid people bring into society. So when I think about roles, considering taking life or giving life falls into one of these roles that could be a gender fluid reality. Hunting, it is not uncommon to have, who would now be considered like colloquial to be maybe a butch lesbian at the time period of two spirits being more respected in society, be also hunting, as well as being a part of what would now also be viewed as a more feminine role. Like so much of the colonial vernacular has impacted how we view identity and how we view these roles. But I think depending on your nation and where you're coming from and what your cultural norms are, a lot of these roles were really shared. A lot of these jobs, a lot of these structures were shared because there's this like internal ecosystem that existed within all of these different structures.
Wow, that's deep. I really try to stay away from sexuality conversations, but we can have them. It's Talking HE podcast. I've been said it. We can do it. We could go anywhere. So was there a such thing, and maybe because it seems as if you are very heavily educated in like queer studies, and I don't know if that actually blends into trans studies as well, but was that a such thing in like the indigenous land, like people who kind of were born one thing and decided to change into another and identify with another?
I definitely can't speak to what I don't know, and I can't speak to anyone having gone through like I think there's like a hard and a soft world with trans identity. I think there's like the soft changes, if you will, of maybe clothing changes or personal like adaptations, if you will, of hair or what have you. And so I think those things definitely did happen because, for example, one aspect of mourning in particular for women to do is to cut their hair short, and to wear blackface and to essentially cover their face in charcoal and their whole bodies in charcoal, and to typically be silent, but also I think more masculine in terms of physicality, is like appearing more aggressive, but ultimately it's a form of grieving. So I think in that realm, there are aspects of things that could be perceived as like soft transitions that are associated with certain contexts and certain time periods. But in terms of like what is now a medical reality for transitioning, I'm not sure. However, I think when I think about things of like abortion, there were very much medical and natural means of abortion that existed in indigenous cultures. And I think very common within Latin American indigeneity, which is ironic because Latin America is such a heavily religious entity of a location now, as well as a militarized one. But yeah, in terms of natural root systems or different teas, I think on that level, there is a medical reality that definitely exists, and so much knowledge that has actually been stolen for what we call holistic healthcare now.
Yeah, and you know, being someone that's from Nigeria, and like you said, I'm also a villager. I'm actually from the village where I'm from. So I understand exactly what you're talking about, and I understand exactly what you mean by the ideology behind having your own voice, space, and identity prior to colonialism or imperialism or before the quote-unquote world revolutions, etc., etc. So you even speaking on the fact that even using the colonizer's tongue takes away from the essence of who we truly are and the things that actually make us special and unique. So I thought that was really, really important that we should highlight. Okay, awesome. So you said that you're into politics, not so much politics. Let me take a step back. Law and policy. What way are you utilizing law and policy to further your education of who you are?
I feel like we talked about this a little in the car. That's funny. It's a great question. I mean, my academic background is in international relations and global politics and international law and in the settlement of disputes or conflict resolution. I have chosen more personally to focus on environmental issues because I think we're living in the dawn of land back. We're living in the era of land is once again everything. Realist power plays zero-sum games. You win, you lose. Everything is attached to land. Everything is attached to that identity in terms of space and sovereignty. So I think I use law and policy right now more in a theoretical space. So, for example, we had been talking about on our way over here of like all the different ways land back can look. And I think one of the more critical ones in this day and age is every state has some form of toll or easy pass that now you can't pay cash. So whoever easy pass is in governments are obviously then using your license plate, your credit card number, what have you, and taking photos while you're going through. So aside from security issues and Native Americans having the largest population of people going missing, indigenous people of Turtle Island, meaning North America, regardless of which country you pick, having the largest population of missing women and children and two-spirits in this hemisphere, I think the ability for us to not pay tolls, not pay Easy Pass, is a really easy legislation that could happen that would make it, one, so people who have been split up historically across state lines and through various tactics now have an easier way of traveling. But also we're talking about what form of reparations and reconciliation can be made over land that is ultimately dead, that has been experiencing so much different layers of ecocide, whether they be the increase of cemeteries in the country, whether they be sewage systems, whether they be pipelines. I mean, it really doesn't matter what it is. Native people were fighting still for spaces that are very much dead, and we will never see them how our ancestors once did. I think one way of being able to help that is make it accessible for us to even go camping, go to the beach, go anywhere.
Yeah, no, that's definitely important because the concept of reparations is an interesting one because we usually hear it from the concept from slavery, right?
Yeah.
From black people or indigenously, not indigenous, but formerly enslaved peoples looking for some kind of restitution from the powers that be. But I think it's definitely fair to say Native Americans definitely need to have that conversation first because before, anybody was enslaved here, the Native Americans were the first ones. So what, outside of accessibility, what are some other ways that you feel Native Americans or indigenous people can be able to get reparations for the onslaught that happened from the taking of their land?
I think a huge layer here, and it kind of goes back to your first question of, or maybe not your immediate first question, your second question of how, oh wait, I don't remember. What is it that people need to know about Native Americans? I think indigenous identity is really politicized in total. I mean, down to DNA tests politicized. So I think one huge layer of this is on top of that politicization for Native Americans in particular and Canadians to a certain extent, there's federal and state recognition. So you have nations that the U.S. government acknowledges exist since about the 70s, acknowledge exists. People have petitioned for this federal recognition. Nations have gone up, hired lawyers, and said to the U.S. government, submitted all of their everything, things that should be in the Smithsonian, their genealogy of thousands of people, artifacts, all of the reasons as to why they should be here, treaties they've signed, the dates in which who met who, all to be federally recognized. So all of these are submitted to their oppressor, asking for freedom. That is no different than a field slave walking into the house and just saying, I should be free for X, Y, and Z. On the flip side, you have people like me who come from state-recognized tribes who might have gone up for federal recognition but have been denied. For whatever reason, they don't value us the same. So we don't receive federal breaks. We also don't receive federal funds. I can't apply for federal grants. I can always, if I want to have my own personal business, I could always apply for private business loan because I'm a U.S. citizen at the end of the day. But from a Native point of view, my tribe can't apply for federal things in the exact same way. We can't do things in terms of what is now been made a capitalistic benefit from the colonizer's point of view as effectively. And one of those things being college. So right now states are really pushing, and I think more in blue states than not, this conversation of just free college for anyone, regardless. In particular, especially if you have a driver's license. So that would mean some undocumented people would be able to go to school for free. However, for states who aren't doing that just yet, that have initiated for Native people to go to school for free, it's only for federally recognized people. That's not for state recognized people. So that already cuts out almost 25 to 30% of indigenous populations, depending on the states that you talk about. So, because then you also have states who don't even recognize natives at all, like Texas. Texas is notorious for acknowledging or saying that all Native Americans are dead, or especially in particular the Karankawa as a nation, who definitely exist, are currently going through enormous amounts of ecocide on their land from a company called Enbridge, which continues to function off of ecocide on other people's territory through ultimately oil pipelines. and they're a Canadian company. They're not even American. You would think states like Texas and Minnesota would care about these things, but they don't. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a real battle. It's essentially, if you're Native in America and want to function, it's because the federal government has said so, or you happen to live in a state that cares about your human rights.
Jesus Christ. That's tough. That's very tough. And speaking about the pipelines, we know that in the north, in Montana, there was a lot going on with the pipelines for the last 5 to 10 years, probably longer than that. Can you tell us an update on what's going on? Because it seems as if it's been a media blackout on that issue, as if it's not even happening anymore.
Yeah, are you referring to North and South Dakota, like the access pipeline? Yeah. Wow. I think there's still ongoing cases, but there's a few updates from that in terms of, I think, also just the corruption that exists on security culture. I think one significant update coming out of pipeline structures is that companies are following indigenous people. Companies are hiring private entities to essentially stalk what are known as land defenders and water protectors, because the U.S. government is trying those individuals who take part in attempting to protect the land in peaceful ways, similar ways as we would terrorism. So, I mean, we're talking about people standing in front of pipelines holding hands and being tried the same way we would be trying a mass murderer. And ultimately, it's all in the name of defending U.S. infrastructure. So pipelines are considered to be a part of infrastructure similarly to military bases. And that's the legal precedent that is being set every time a pipeline happens, and protesters and land defenders and people who are essentially poetry in action are peacefully defending and arrested. So I think there's this a legal precedent that's attempting to be set that is really dangerous for just the concept of freedom of speech moving forward. But more significantly, North, South Dakota, and a few other states like Nebraska are being a part of a new wave of pipelines for natural gas. And so we're seeing possibly a move, yes, from fossil fuels, but only to then turn what is viewed as green and natural gas, which are just code words for extraction from
fracking.
The earth. Yeah, so now it's just a new wave that's supposed to be okay, but it's in states where all they have is farming. If you frack with all that methane, you're gonna blow up all of the middle of the country, guys.
And lead to earthquakes.
Yes, because there's also a huge mountain range there, and that's why Pahasapa for the Lakota, or what is known as oh my god, the mountains with all the men, Mount Rushmore, like that as a location. I mean, General Custer, who is known as having no listening ears, and that's exactly what happened to him when he went in illegally. His ears were taken off and stabbed through. But they went in for gold. There's minerals there. We know this in mountain ranges. There are minerals. And if you live where there is no shelf or a lack of a shelf, then you're able to penetrate and not have a ripple effect. I am of the mental camp, and maybe I'm a conspiracy theorist, or maybe I am just putting science into play in the way that companies don't want. But they've created problems, and now they're creating solutions for that they can still benefit off of out of these problems.
Of course.
So farming as an entity began in the 1700s, but cows and pigs are not from this continent. Those were brought here from a little island called England, right? So our first wave of issues just started right there. And now it's just being built off of that. So I think it's common in climate change conversations and pipeline conversations for it immediately to also jump to the farming industry, airplanes, and then China and India always for some reason. And below the equator just gets blamed for everything, even though they've done nothing. So there's this huge misconception off rip that is also directly tied to colonization off rip. Why do we not draw that same parallel to all of our other issues? I'm not saying all of our issues are cows and pigs being here, but if those cows and pigs are people.
Oh yeah, if you even assault a dog, you even tell a dog to move, you're going to jail, you're going to get killed. Let's say you wear a fur, Peter going to throw paint on you. You know what I mean? So trust me.
PETA's a huge issue for Native people right now.
I can only imagine.
Honestly.
I can only imagine. And everything you're saying, it makes a lot of sense, because that's usually how I don't even want to give colonizers that much credit, but that's usually how the game goes. When it comes to names of power, the real power structures is not right or left; it's the one in the middle. So when you understand how the game is played, you're not really surprised by who's doing what. But what I'm really interested to know more about is reservations, because I've noticed that there's a lot of casinos on reservation land. If you go to like Niagara Falls, there's a casino on native land, and it's interesting to me because it's like those are places where people are gambling, people are drinking, smoking. If I'm not mistaken, indigenous people from the United States or from this nation, they suffer from a high volume of not only PTSD but suicide and a lot of other mental illnesses. So my question really is, how do you think all of this is impacting your people?
Ooh. Another huge question. Also a really controversial question. And I say that because the federal versus state recognition plays a role in casinos. Only federally recognized nations can have casinos. So right there we have a difference. And I think the gambling conversation within itself was something that came up as a response to economic issues, because prior to casinos, there was no structure for indigenous people other than what is known as smoke shops, which are, depending on where you go or the reservations you're on, some of them are literally kind of like cabins on people's property, and they'll sell tobacco or cigarettes because that is allowed. Tobacco is considered a medicine. It comes from the Eastern Door. It's something that is indigenous to this continent and just grows. So, this portion of the world. And I think casinos came out of the desire for economic benefit. And it's not to say, I think all cultures have their own variations of what can be called gambling in the colonizer's language, but what I think are just games. And I say that because, I mean, there's this assumption that shells have been money for Native people. And I mean, we're barterers, we like to trade. So what's being viewed as a gift is being viewed as money, and so automatically we have a valuing system difference at a minimum, if it's not a communication difference. But yeah, casinos don't exist for all nations. Not every federally recognized tribe has a casino. Not all tribes, in terms of the citizens of the tribe, benefit evenly from casinos. Not all tribes have a reservation. There are reservations that exist where there is no official tribe. And I think one example of that right now, who as residents are going through significant issues, is the Winnemucca Indian Colony in northern Nevada. I mean, we're talking about a state that has Las Vegas in it and is founded off of, cowboy Indian rule and founded off of mafia rule at that. But in northern Nevada, you have this federally recognized landmass. So the land is federally recognized as an Indian reservation, but the people themselves are not being recognized and instead are being disenrolled and actively, forcefully evicted off of their land by the U.S. government themselves. So they don't have a casino. They, as individuals, aren't considered to be recognized by the U.S. government, but the land is. And so I think there's huge differences in terms of what this relationship with the U.S. government actually means for an economic benefit for some people. And when we think about marijuana legislation coming into this mix, marijuana is also a medicine. Marijuana grows in the Arctic, for the love of God. I mean, this is something that indigenous people have been a part of, been using. Hemp has very much been woven within our societies, and we're now seeing further corruption in terms of what it means to be indigenous and also survive in this world. So I think whether it be gambling, whether it be the alcohol industry, whether it be marijuana, I think it all unfortunately comes down to like where colonization kind of left a tribe. And the same is true of reservations. Some reservations, I think, it's apparent that tribes have money, or it's apparent that they are using money for different things. And I think one example of that is like the Mohegan in Connecticut or the Pequot. They have museums and they have casinos, but they also have child centers, and like there are larger community structures. They have their own police department, they have their own fire department, they have their own courthouse. I mean, and honestly, their vehicles look better than my personal town. But and then the Navajo, for example, going to the Western Door, I mean, the Obama administration considered the Navajo Nation to be the 51st state. And that was like an active colloquialism of his presidential administration when referring to and working with the Navajo Nation. So that's a huge, not only compliment, but I think it's really like a hats off to tribes that are applying funds where they can be. But I think it's also, still important to point out that the proximity to the federal government exists. And I think one should always question that.
Without a doubt. So I guess my next question is, and like I said, first, before we can continue, thank you so much for just being here. I hope this is a safe space for you. And I hope that, this is an opportunity for you to really speak on some of these things. Because I'll be honest with you, I never knew none of this. We were never really taught this type of history in our schools, especially in public schools. So being able to hear this is really a big deal. But my next question has to do with the population of indigenous people here. How many indigenous people are still in existence? And do you believe the size or the amount of indigenous people play a role in why some of the legislation is the way it is?
I think I need you to be more specific in both sections of the question in terms of when you ask about quantity of indigenous people, do you mean for like North America?
Yes.
Okay. Because I could also maybe give a percentage for globally coming from the United Nations, but like it's a couple of years old. And then I'm curious, when you say impacting legislation, I guess, like, what legislation are you thinking of, or what do you mean by that?
So I guess, and these are great follow-up questions. So first is basically how many Native Americans or indigenous people are there in the United States currently? And basically the next question is the amount of people, do you feel is the reason why some of the politics or some of the things that's happening is happening? Like, do you think it's because of the size of the group of people as a reason why some of the legislation that's probably put in place is put in place for the reason why things don't work for y'all? Favor. And yes, please take a shot.
Okay, well, no, we just talking about alcoholism.
I'm joking.
Like, very much a thing.
And it's not a shot; it's immaculate punch. You guys know I do this all the time, so please just enjoy. And this is just our way of fellowshipping and just breaking bread because we still got food to eat and things to do.
Wow.
So first question: how many?
So, okay, I cannot give a specific number, and I definitely feel like that's a fluctuating number. The population of Native Americans has risen, though, in both Canada and the United States. I would say Mexico, it's hard to give a number on, just given the amount of femicide that's currently happening, as well as I think between cartel and governmental influence on indigenous populations, we're seeing like a real suppressance of what indigeneity in Mexico truly is. So with that being said, for the United States, the indigenous population was roughly about 1.2 to 1.5 of the population, percentage, of the United States population. And that has risen to, I want to say, about 2.3.
That's super small.
It appears small. However, global perspective, the global indigeneity is about 3 to 5%. And we also, as indigenous people globally, sit on a majority of the world's biodiversity. So it feels small as a number of a population in terms of the U.S., but you're also hoping people will check off Native on a census form.
True.
Which is something that came out during the civil rights era just to further divide people in the first place, and also came out during, Vietnam War and all these like trying to identify Asians to put them also in internment camps. I think people forget a lot of Asian Americans were forced to be on reservations for periods of time when they were still prisoner of war camps, and that they had their own. When we think about New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, those are actually really dangerous states to be Asian in, and that's like completely been overlooked. But it's, the numbers sound small, but when you look at them even deeper in terms of, so within that population, and we talk about nations who have reservations, so federally promised land to them, or nations who are state recognized, when you look at those numbers, all of a sudden that becomes different, because you're not just hearing a number, but instead you would be putting pinpoints on a map. And then that becomes a lot, actually, because if you overlay that map, which policy analysts do, like that guy on MSNBC with the crazy hair and the glasses, little crazy white guy, like, my mom loves him though. You know, he, like, any of those maps that he has where it's like, this is the blue districts that we really need to vote X, Y, and Z of a way, or like, these are the flip. Overlay that with a map of reservations or where these 2% of Native Americans live. Ooh.
It gets real interesting.
Real interesting. Real toxic, too. Because, like, I think the same way this past election, when it came to Joe Biden, everybody all of a sudden woke up to, like, well, maybe pandering for the black vote is hard. Everyone was like, they're different. Whoa. When you want to pander to Native people, you cannot make any Native person happy. So stop right there. Every Native person is a flip vote. Every single indigenous person is a flip vote, because anything can change and everyone's realities are totally different. And everyone's blood memory and trauma is of someone trying to make a deal with them. To be indigenous is to constantly have someone try to cut a deal with you that you don't want to make in the first place and you don't want to be a part of at all.
It's like it's the worst of two evils, basically.
Yes, but like constantly from day one, watching a boat come over, stranding themselves, eating their own dead people, not wanting to eat strawberries or tomatoes just because they're red and they remind them of the devil and all these weird things, trying to help people, watching them trip over mounds that are ultimately refrigerators underground, eating all of your food that would survive a winter. These people that also don't speak the same language of you, and they're white, they got these ghost face. I mean,
it gets real interesting when
yes,
you start speaking about it from your perspective.
And then to sit in high school and have some white girl take my seat, even though all my stuff was right there, and I say, girl, you just colonized me, and her be like, what? Yeah, you did. You fucking did, because I taught you what corn is, ultimately. In my blood memory, that's what happened, and now you took my seat. So I'm going to need you to get up and move, or I'm going to need you to give me $50 right now, because I said so.
Yeah, it gets real deep. So, no, it does. So, do indigenous people consider themselves black, or what? Or is that? Hold on. Let's have this question. Let's have answer this question real quick. Or is the concept and a social structure of what race is a colonizer's term, and to even identify as that is furthering dividing people from the realities of who they truly are at their most natural selves? We got guests in the spot. It's crazy.
I phone a friend.
So, going back.
You introduce yourself. This is the
Welcome to Talking Cheap, man. Hosted by yours truly, Mr. Saboy Clears Real Talk, a.k.a. Immaculate Clee. And I got a special guest. Go ahead, guest. Introduce yourself.
Akira. I'm a photographer and a good comrade of Keshia. To go back to your question about how many populations of indigenous people are there. For me, it's like me and Keshia have different realities. I feel like I relate more to you than with Keshia, only because of the way that we grew up, raised, and taught at school. So for me, it's like how many of us do not call ourselves indigenous because of what we're taught, to be ashamed to be part of, indigenous people who have a relationship with land. That thing's kind of shameful. So I feel like a lot of us don't know that we are that, and this, yeah. So, yeah.
Nah, I just appreciate you bringing your energy into the space. So I guess Native or indigenous people are not black.
No, I don't think that's the answer.
What's the answer?
So, this is the hot topic right now in terms of...
Welcome to Talk Ain't Cheap
This
podcast.
is like literally, so, because you know how there's like black Twitter? Yeah, okay, no, there's native Twitter and there's native Instagram, and there's this whole thing called Indian Country or Turtle Island. That's what we call North America. And man, in Indian Country right now, the BIPOC structure is I don't want to call it a problem, but it's causing problems. So, have you ever heard of a show called Reservation Dogs? Okay, it's on Hulu. Watch it. I'm not throwing any shade, and I don't want to be sued, okay? But so I think in a modern sense, this is the like nuanced approach. Reservation Dogs came out. It's a show about natives doing the native thing, reservation life, in particular Western Plains reservations, because all reservations are different. All native people are different. And they've taken some heat from natives of not including black natives and not including black indigeneity. What does that mean? That means to have the stereotypical only like long hair, high cheekbone, like Mexican, maybe Asian, maybe I don't know looking native. That's a problem because that's not the only structure that exists. That's also, it's just, there's white natives. There are European natives who are then, typically white. It's very cold. So I think there's a lot of issues with colorism in indigeneity, and I think that exists everywhere. For black indigeneity in America, I think there's also something that people won't talk about, and I'm going to say it. Talk about it. I am going to catch all the heat
Talk
in the
about
world,
it.
I don't care.
We here.
So I think there's also this really traumatized jealousy that exists for Native people when it comes to black people.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is in America, everyone acknowledges that everything is black culture. But you're on Native land. We came first. Lenapehoking, Manhattana, is Native land where Natives were forced to enslave black people to build the land. The Haudenosaunee, there are nations that were forced to have slaves in order to complete treaties that allowed them to continue to hunt. We always put the land first. And I think the issue is when it came to black people, to Buffalo Soldiers, you're on land that isn't yours, thus you didn't put it first. You literally put yourself and your own blood and skin first. And that's all of what Black Lives Matter is, right? That's all of what everything has happened. Black bodies matter. Black presence matters and has always been threatening for the United States. And to a certain level, it's also been threatening to Native people when those same black bodies are not acknowledging Native existence also. So I think there's like this huge, and you have people like Kyrie Irving, who I think has attempted to shed light on his own personal Native realities and what it means to also just be perceived as, because we're all in a racist mind. We all black. We all a nigga in a racist mind. Period. Point blank. It doesn't, if you stand, I have met Holocaust survivors on the Jewish side and on the German side who hate Jews. And we all the same in their mind. We really are. But for Indigenous people, I think, unfortunately, we are very emotional people, very empathetic people. I think we're, when you think about high context, low context cultures, everything has meaning. Everything is coming out in riddles. Everything is coming out in things that you have to dissect and decipher. And I think when you see Indigenous people who don't look black and have issues, quote unquote, with blackness, I think it's coming from a real place of a level of jealousy that they haven't figured out how to handle. Because, you look at the NBA, you look at most sports in this country, predominantly black, 95+% black. You might have one Native person ever. But the NFL was founded by an Indigenous man, Jim Thorpe. And he is not credited with that. He has not been put back in the Hall of Fame. Nothing. So, there's just so many issues in terms of, I think, ultimately what boils down to what feels like respect. And I hate for that to exist for people who ultimately have the same oppressor, right? And I think when we think about blackness in America, I struggle with just that concept of a word, because I think of black as a color. Culture is different. Where people come from is different. And the whole point of the United States creating blackness is to erase where people come from. And I don't know, my mom is a college professor, and I think about some of her students who have been like, well, I'm African American, but I'm really African and American. My father is from Senegal and I was born here. And I'm like, okay, yeah, because to anybody else, if you don't explain that, then they're just like, yeah, it's another black person. They're African American. Call it a day. But if you so what does that mean for then being black? And I think there's, or even when we think about Kuwaitis in America, the Middle East and people of the Middle East in America are from a portion of Africa, but you say you're black. Depending on where you are in America, that's no, you are Arab, my friend. So, because
I was going to ask the question, just because you're in Africa, does that make you black? And, even the concept of blackness, as we understand, is a socialized construct. It's not a real identity.
Yes.
It's a construct, a socialized construct created. Because I always tell people all the time, if you really look at history, prior to 1960s, a lot of black people didn't know that black people outside of America existed. Like, you got to think, the civil rights movement really highlighted, Pan-Africanism, really highlighted that, hey, there's other people who look like you.
That was the second, I'm sorry. I was trying to remember what the second half of your question was before, and it was like, why now do you think the numbers are related?
Ding, ding, ding.
I'm glad you said that, because I think we're kind of living in this pan-indigenous wavelength, but only because of all of the environmental and human rights issues we're having. But I think for Turtle Island, for North America, we're seeing legislation and we're seeing social movements happen because we're all living in this 7th generation prophecy. We all come from this, we're all of the medicine wheel of the north, south, east, and west, and we believe that we live all in these multiple generational rings, and the 7th one is the most significant. And that exists in other cultures, that exists in religions, that exists in terms of what it means to identify essentially with our solar system. But in particular, literally right now, we're living in that 7th generation. So for indigenous people, I think the reason we're seeing these things happening is because the youth have come into power now. The generations who were witnessing people like John Trudell and Russell Means and Wilma Mankiller and all of the indigenous scholars who were once activists and youth occupying buildings, like, we are now living out some of their wildest dreams and demanding those things in power and actually being able to benefit off of what steps have been made. So, I think ultimately, like other issues in this country, like, I think a lot of the action that's coming can all be attributed to the youth.
Without a doubt, because we here, and we not backing down for nothing. Okay, cool. I guess my final question in regards to being an N8VS.
N8TV.
N8TVS, but I saw the N8. I like the N8 one. The
Well,
N8
this is a
fire.
company, Natives. They do spins on like modern stuff from a native swag.
That N8 is fire. I like it a lot. I might need to get me some N8 gear.
It's a vibe.
Oh, without a doubt. But what do you believe we need to do as a community of the next generation of leaders, thought leaders, innovators, etc., to be able to support our indigenous friends and also bridge the gap between indigenous people, black people, and cultures that go beyond borders?
Yeah, I think we're definitely living in the wavelength of like black and indigenous people having to work together, and black people, I think, needing to own aspects of their indigeneity. I agree that I think if you're not raised knowing who you are or fully knowing it's okay to be who you are, there is kind of like this coming out moment or like awakening to what it means to be indigenous, or what it feels to actually like have that relationship not only with the land but also with community that is in the process of doing those same things. And there is power to be said in having elders pass down knowledge and being able to understand stories and just intuitively be able to have those moments. I think for our futures to be successful, but I think also for us to impact each other and learn from each other, I think it really, really requires a lot of self-awareness and being able to take a step back. Because I think being able to take a step back, but also being able to be uncomfortable. Yes, I identify as Native. My mother's mother is from Ireland and grew up in Virginia. And her father, Trinidadian, and my father's father being the first freed man in my family coming out of North Carolina. Always identifying as Native American, but growing up with a big mama and essentially being an orphan, so not really knowing his family background. So I think there's a lot to be said for visiting all of your DNA and visiting all of these different places you connect to, and also trying to understand where those overlaps are. And for me, the most significant and relevant one is how we relate to the environment. Because there's this like reality that you need land in order to be successful or what have you in a capitalistic world. But I think past what success means as a variable, we all need to be able to physically come together to understand what sustainability means for us. And for all of our communities, there are health issues. For all of our communities, there are injustices that can be fixed by growing foods that are good for us, that can be fixed by having communal spaces to come together. And yeah, I think more charter schools that are solely BIPOC and I think, or like religious minorities, like those are the types of spaces that we need more of, and protective spaces, especially if we're also going to acknowledge that the youth are the ones doing these things. I was one of those kids that had my braids cut in school by some racist white girl. And I know that still happens today. And the fact that that isn't considered a hate crime or a religious crime in this country against a Native American, when that was a war tactic at one point, it blows my mind, let alone in terms of how do we work together. I mean, how many black women have been fired for wearing their hair naturally? How many black women have gone on a date with a white person and the moment a do-rag comes out, all hell breaks loose? I mean, like, there are so many things that we very well do bond over, but we're not in the same spaces all the time. Or if we are, we don't know it. There's many times I'm around black people and I'm assumed to just be black. And if I bring up a Native perspective, then it's like, whoa, we let someone in. Like, it can go from being friendly to aggressive, but it can also go from being like just inquisitive. So I think there's being able to be, what does it mean to be uncomfortable? And are you, okay with opening up sometimes and hoping that there's a future for it and not just, assuming that there won't be one.
As well as just what the safety look like for us, by us, with us in mind. Yeah,
not all skin is kin.
Come on. Okay. Last question. Okay, I already said that was my last question, but I low-key lied. I lied. I'm sorry. I lied on my own podcast. But you can do that when you have your own shit, man. You do what you want when you're popping. What is dating? Like, is there like specific rules of how you must date and court within indigenous culture?
Oh my God, I cannot answer that. I think.
Why you don't date indigenous brothers?
Oh no, we love
you don't want homie. What's an indigenous man name? Because I think honestly, and I don't want to be rude, but I think everybody needs an indigenous name. Nigga with the waves.
You know what? I'm gonna be honest.
Homie who talks in his sleep, aka pillow talking Szechuan. You feel me?
No, I'm gonna be honest.
Bitch ass nigga, but he ain't tricking.
I think I'm gonna keep it real. This is like. Yeah. Oh Lord.
Man with trunk in his legs.
I think the Lakota have some of the best names ever. Like
what names? What names have you heard that's fire?
Well, no. Okay, like some of their names are like directly translated. So like some people's official last names might be like stabs once. And it's like, how did they get that name? Oh, my great somebody stabbed somebody once. And it's like, fire. Oh my God. Yeah. Or it's like, won't leave bison. And it's like, oh my God, why? They wouldn't leave their fucking bison, man. Fuck the U.S. military. And I'm like, oh my God, I love it. So like, they just have names that are just like, wow, yeah, you're a badass. That's how you got your name. But dating, I think is different for everybody. There's this thing called snagging, snagging. That's just like hooking up. That's just, you snag.
It's snagging?
Yeah,
I need to give
powwow season. Oh my God, if you're not competing, they might be snagging. You gotta find out.
What you said? Powwow season?
Yes, the summer. Go to a powwow. Shinnecock. Pull up.
Can we go?
Yeah, it's open to the public. Shinnecock is.
Yeah, shitty.
Oh my God, it's like 5 days long. Last year, Dave East pulled up.
Oh, we at shitty. That's it. We at the shitty.
It was a vibe.
We Shinnecocking all summer. Facts. We outside and we snagging them things that we snagging and not. No, I love it.
I'm sorry now in advance.
I love it. Shout out to all the Shinnecocking things and not. Shout out to all the snagging things and not. We outside.
No, for real. Shinnecock is a beautiful example of a nation that is black and indigenous.
We outside with the
mixed
shinnies.
And proud.
Shout out to all them Shinnecocks and not. All right, cool. Is there anything you feel like we need to speak about? I met you at the fire conference. I didn't go to the fire conference, but you were there.
The fire conference?
Was that what the conference in LA that I met you at?
No, I was at a conference about like intergenerational trauma and genocide studies it was pretty intense. There were people there from Australia, there were people there from Argentina, but it was kind of talking about this this topic, but across different countries.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, what's next for you?
What's next for me and also my friend here, Akira, is Black and Indigenous Futures, which is a photo shoot and a mixture of a documentary. We're putting things together, ideally different mediums of art, trying to tell the story of, what do Black and Indigenous futures look like, and acknowledging, I think, all of the immoral and unethical violations of, like, how our photos are even used and identities are even used, and trying to right those wrongs ourselves.
I love it. I would love to get involved to find some way to support. My last question. I know I said that 6 times. It's okay. We can do what we want when we popping. You make music.
Oh, Lord. Yep.
Yeah, talk about that.
So who is K Banks and where did that come from?
Damn.
Oh, my God.
K Banks.
Where did K Banks come from? Because I know the scholar. That's why it's interesting to me. I met the scholar. I didn't met K Banks.
Yeah. Oh, Jesus.
You're like a indigenous Megan Thee Stallion.
Oh. Oh, my God. No, stop. We don't call 12.
Hashtag I bust
What's
back.
with the silence? You know what?
Hashtag
No,
I
fuck that.
bust back.
I
I bust back.
I
like what I heard.
I'm sorry. I don't care. I'm all about the support the things or whatever. But I just feel like you go to my profile, I'm very anti the police, and I'm going to carry that rhetoric all the way through. So. But.
Hashtag shoot your shot, but don't get shot.
Yeah, you know.
Vibes and that. Sorry.
The kitchen is
I
hot.
apologize.
Get out. I just no, music is a vibe. I think I like call it. So yeah, academic wise, I always did open mic nights or like spoken word. So it's just fun, but music I think is also something for Native people that we're not like looked at in a serious way. Like we have our traditional music, which is hand drums, or like if you're coming from an Arctic nation, throat singing or what have you. But
throat singing sounds fire.
It's intense. It's beautiful.
I gotta hear that on the mixtape.
You should. It's intense. But there's no Native Lil Kim. Why?
Because you gotta be the one to do it.
Yes, but also because what it means to be sexy for indigenous people was destroyed through colonization, fetishization. I mean, if you want to take Pocahontas and make it a Halloween outfit, then that totally deteriorates what my ability to be sexy within my own identity really could be. You know what I mean? So I think there's something to be said for like the way the music industry functions, and also how indigenous youth can or can't look up to people. And I don't know, there's something to be said for like a lack of all of these identities, like especially now that K-pop is a thing. And I mean, shout out to Asians, because like y'all are up. Latina season been on the rise. I just feel like Native season happens in our own world, and that's what, like, Native Twitter, it's a thing. Native Instagram,
I want to get involved. I want to get tapped in.
I'll send you some. I think like a good place to start is Decolonize Myself. But like music wise, actually, I'm totally going to plug someone right now, and I don't care how it seems. Natani Means, who is the child of actually a really political and heavily influential Native philosopher and activist. So it definitely runs deep for Native people, I think, to go political and then all of a sudden be artsy.
Any works that we should look up to really learn? Because like I said, I'm trying to keep talking cheap, really anti-mainstream, so we can keep it as a safe space. But you know eventually how this go.
Yeah.
When you get real pop and the streets need it and they want to fund it. So you going, but is there places that we can go right now for the next 5 years before they come and take it, that could give us, because they're going to do that.
Yeah.
That's just how America works. That we can get some knowledge that is very, very to the roots and very, very grassroots to your experience, to your ancestors' experience, that can help educate us and move us forward for the generations to come.
Yeah, I think in terms of Instagram, Decolonize Myself, Indian Collective, NDN Collective. Also, like, Indian shit posting, NDN shit posting, just for like social fun memes, because I mean, it's really great to like know things. It's totally amazing. Nothing makes me happier than walking up to somebody that actually knows something. But on the flip side, I've met a lot of people that are like aware of Native genocides and can like name all of these horrible acts, but they've never been to a powwow. They don't understand. I might say Skoden when I see a roadkill and they're like, what the fuck does that mean? And like everything is just all of a sudden they know nothing. So I think being a part of like social cues is also pretty critical. Like today is National Ribbon Skirt Day, which is just like a cultural attire that looks different, but it's a skirt that's made up of different ribbons and like patterned cloth. So yeah, like being able to be a part of those social things. I'm trying to think like Last Real Indians, Indian Country Today is our version of like the New York Times. So yeah, and then there's also like magazines that are just kind of supporting of Native issues like High Country and things like that.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, K-Bangs, Keshia. If people want to connect with you, where can they go to do so?
Oh, Lord. Yeah. Music Instagram is @_Kbangs_. Political things is @Sakimakwe, which is SAKIMAXKWE.
I love it. Like I said, shout out to everyone who's here. Like I said, you're tuning in, Talk Ain't Cheap. Thank you all for tuning in. Y'all know the slogan, Talk Ain't Cheap. It's not that deep. It's a vibe. Make sure y'all follow Talk Ain't Cheap Network. Make sure y'all follow me, Cletus_Real Talk. And follow the group and the organization that keeps this thing flowing and going, the Cletus group. And like I said, if you want to get really in tune with me, fuck with my company and fuck with my think tank incubator. Don't mess with the vibes. Y'all know the rules by now. And like I said, you're tuning in, Talking Cheap. It's not that deep. It's a vibe.